You know that we're in Inuvik, we're 200 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle. And when you think of how big Canada is as a landscape, getting fiber up here is no easy feat, and it takes, help from the people in this room and the people in Inuvik and Tuktoyaktuk as well, and people like who is our Canadian Olympian.
Communities having the ability to benefit in the future. Projects like the Mackenzie Valley Fiber Link are a priority for the government of Northwest Territories. They enable our government to offer improved delivery of social services, supporting healthcare, improved education and social support programs, as well as facilitate economic development and diversification. The Fiber Link also fulfills the government of Northwest Territories' mandate commitment to help modernize the economy and enable growth in all sectors. As a result, the Mackenzie Valley Fiber Link, Inuvik is now positioned to be one of the leading sites for tracking, receiving real-time data from polar orbiting satellites used for scientific, mapping, weather surveillance, and will further enable growth to remote sensing and commercial satellite industry in Inuvik. From the drive out to and forward, this visual demonstrates our ongoing effort. Since construction commenced, we have experienced considerable interest nationally and internationally in the growth of the Inuvik Satellite Station facility. The potential impact of an expanded satellite ground station in Inuvik on the Aurora Research Center
projects here. Of the Inuvialuit Regional Corporation.
Howdy. Welcome everybody. You're looking good. First of all, it's Inuvik, so emphasis on you because you make Inuvik, and it's Inuvialuit. We'll get you to learn how to say those two words by the end of this meeting. At the very least, that's the extent of my IT capabilities, by the way. I'm one of these old fogies that has to have the hard product in front of me rather than one of those little regional corporation. You've been wandering through my area, I understand. Some of you actually went swimming in Tuck, as it's commonly referred to. You're one of the brave ones, because most of our own people around here don't even do that. Right, Annie? And Annie's a very strong proponent of her communities from, and it's good to see her here today. But it's good to see you come to America. I would usually say Canada. It's a 9-hour jet ride from Ottawa, I usually say, and you're still in the same country. But I understand a lot of you are from all over North America and maybe other places. But I just want to point out in regards to, since there was also the remoteness, but I can't reiterate and stress and emphasize enough the crucial importance of getting internet, not only in this region, but in remote areas like this throughout North America. For us, it's not something that we can live with or without. It's becoming a necessity. We have the expertise our communities like nurses, doctors, or teachers. So this is a valuable tool that we see as a benefit to our communities, where a doctor sitting in, I hear somebody's from Santa Fe, can be on the internet talking to one of our health centers in Polituk, you know, giving direction and advice to the medical team that's in that community to give them assistance. Or somebody sitting in Ontario can science class, such as the example in Uluhaktuk. 12. When I say that, most of the students have to take another year or maybe 2 of what we call upgrading, because they don't have the basic classes that everybody expects in the South. But these 3 went straight into university in BC, so kudos to them and to everybody's efforts for making that a reality. By the way, that video needs to be updated, because I think and you know, my understanding is you're some of the people that do that sort of stuff in the background. So we're looking to you for your support, your direction, your recommendations, assistance, if you make it to Ottawa or Washington, to lobby for us. But again, I don't want to overemphasize the things, but it still has a long ways to go in regards to being a reality just in this community, where it's reached the end of its line to date. The Dempster Highway link that's coming, we had to lobby for that to come north to connect with this part of Canada rather than going south, so that there was redundancy. But there's still the incomplete line that still needs to go to Tukti. Have you visited? There's the commitment to build the rest of the line to there, so we want to see that happen as well. In regards to some of the initiatives at IRC, as we're commonly referred to, is you've already seen that in regards to our support for the e-learning, but we're also doing what I call the IFA 101. If you don't know what that is, it's the Inuvialuit Final Agreement. It's our treaty with Canada. It's Canada's treaty with us, where there needs to be an education process. So that's the first thing we're putting on, because I'm part of the next generation that's taken on the task of making sure that this treaty is implemented properly amongst other Inuvialuit people. But we need to educate this next group of people and younger people than us, because we're seeing not only the culture, but the history, but the meaning of what the final agreement means. So we're using this as a tool. Other things that we're doing are working with the University of Alberta to digitize all of our cultural artifacts and papers, etc., so that they could be accessed and utilized by anybody, especially our education system and our cultural center. I want to point out, a lot of you are probably aware of the Asia to Prudhoe Bay or Alaska, northern part of Alaska, the undersea cable that was just run through there, the investment of the Indigenous people in that area within that, and that was phase 1 of that project. Phase 2 is supposed to run from Prudhoe Bay to Greenland, you know, and that's where I was just half joking, if you can lobby for support of that link to run through Canada's islands so that there's better connectivity. That would help those communities that can access that so much more. And with that, Canada has committed $750 million to the broadband fund. Well, how far can that go in reality? You've seen some of the scales around here and the cost just to run a link to this community in this region. I mean, that would probably cover the undersea cable from Prudhoe Bay to Greenland alone, but this is Canada's commitment in general. So that's why I was saying there needs to be longer-term visionary planning rather than politics stepping into some of these issues where when a commitment is made to these objectives that it's stuck to ensure that people are getting the basic essential services that others across North America expect and receive. But again, I am a politician, I guess, and as Jim says, but I'm digressing. I'm supposed to just be saying welcoming remarks right now, so I just want to say welcome to Inuvik. We look forward to hosting you tonight. There's going to be a lot of country food. Some you've probably never experienced. I recommend you try it. But there'll also be cultural events for you to enjoy and take part in, if you so choose. But once again, welcome to Inuvik and the region, and I hope you enjoy your stay, safe travels, and as we say, kuyanak, kuyanaini, kuanakutin.
Well, thank you. Now I'd like to welcome the panelists for modern connectivity in communities. The moderator, Jane, and I get the panelists up here. Penny? There they are. Jordan? Oh, Jordan, yes. We have one more welcoming, and maybe the panelists can just stay on deck here for a second. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Being the Indigenous Connectivity, it's a little sad that one of our Indigenous nations was left out of the opening remarks until last night, but welcome everyone to the traditional territory of the Gwich'in. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Jordan Peterson. I'm the Deputy Grand Chief of the Gwich'in Tribal Council, and I'm one of the young fogies that use these gadgets and not the hard copies in front of them. But a bit of background, as Joanne spoke to, the Gwich'in Tribal Council was established through a comprehensive land claim agreement signed in 1992, and is a modern treaty with Canada. And just to get a bit of as to how long this agreement's been around, but also how far behind we are to the rest of Canada when it comes to connectivity and infrastructure. I was 5 years old when our land claim was signed, and now leading an organization that has about 25,000 square kilometers and represents 3,500 Gwich'in across Canada and in this world. And really, I couldn't imagine doing this job without being able to pick up a phone and talk to a federal minister or from my home, or be able to use emails to be able to reach out, video conferencing. But back then in 1992, much of our people had to travel to Yellowknife, had to travel to Ottawa to be able to just do that simple thing that we kind of take for granted nowadays. And kudos to them for their commitment in ensuring that our nations move forward in regards to modern treaties and really being leaders within the relationship with the Government of Canada and Indigenous nations. Some of the things that the Gwich'in Tribal Council is doing is that we're partnering with the U of A and on digital literacy within the GSA. So the Gwich'in settlement area and our communities. We have 4 communities: Inuvik, Klavik, Sigachik, and Fort McPherson. We have a partnership with the Aurora College for Emerging Arts and Technology program. We've also been pretty supportive of the satellite farms and the fiber optic line and the knowledge economy and the STEM outreach in our schools within the Beaufort Delta. A few of the other things that we've been involved in, and for those of you that are working within these fields, is that we have, you know, active engagement and partnerships on renewables and other forms of partnership with academia that allow us to give our next generation of professionals an opportunity to learn more about the knowledge economy. We'll be having our 5th annual academic conference at the University of Saskatchewan in Saskatoon next March. We just had our 4th one at the University of Alberta this past March, and the academic conference allows our young people that haven't pursued a post-secondary education to travel to a university, you know, to show them that leaving their small community isn't that scary, that there's Aboriginal communities in all of our academic institutions across this country and across North America for that matter. And we focus specifically on kids that have graduated, or youth that have graduated high school but haven't gone to some sort of post-secondary program. In the 4 years, we have about an 83% success rate. Of those almost 70 kids that we've taken now have gone to some sort of post-secondary program or some sort of internship, either with the Gwich'in Tribal Council or the government. And we're pretty proud behind that, because it's really building that next generation of educated young Gwich'in. And this next academic conference is going to focus around sovereignty and energy sovereignty, and primarily getting our kids educated and learning about technology and ways forward within the knowledge economy. But we still will be focusing primarily on public policy and modern treaties, which has been the theme over the last 4 years. And one of the things that I wanted to emphasize within my welcome and opening remarks to this conference is the willingness, I think, of all Aboriginal groups across this country for partnership and collaboration. And it's what's needed for our economy moving forward. We have some of our communities that have a 60% unemployment rate, and that shouldn't be the case for any place in North America, let alone the world. And we're in a unique position right now in the world with the satellite station in our community, with fiber optics, and as Dwayne stated, we don't have connection to houses within this community, and more broadly towards the more remote communities of Aklavik, Tuk, and the Inuvialuit communities. But our leadership we're all trying to think outside of the box about what's next and what are the possibilities for our region. I'm a strong supporter of the satellite station. I'm a strong supporter of the fiber optic line, because really I do think that we are, as I stated, are in a unique position to be able to take advantage of the people in this room and working together on what's next. And just as a closing remarks, I really believe that the Arctic is positioned to be able to offer unique services to the high-tech sector, and due to part of our geography, as everyone's been talking about this morning. And we welcome you here and look forward to the 2 days of networking, the exchange of ideas, and shared thoughts towards an exciting future. With that, Masi to all the organizers, and welcome again to Inuvik. Masi.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Jordan Peterson, Grand Chief, Deputy Grand Chief, my apologies, for not including you in the opening remarks. It was a mistake on my part, actually. I did get the note a little bit earlier. I just overlooked it, my apologies. I'd also like to invite the panelists and the moderator up. So you're waiting on deck. You're welcome to grab a seat here. Great. And we'll get started. Thanks. Thanks. button, you talk, and then when you're done, you press them off, okay?
Okay, some logistics just to get us started. For the panelists, who will call out their names in a minute, you press the green thing in front of you at the base of the microphone, and voila, it turns on. So, good morning. I am Jane. My 78-year-old mother and 79-year-old father send you greetings. I am from Maine, not anywhere close to how far north we are here, but they were so excited that I was coming that my father said, "You have to say hello." So I send you greetings from Maine. I actually live in Washington, D.C. and work for the Internet Society. I love what I do. I sometimes get excited when I talk, and I talk too fast. So wave your hands at me if I start to speak too quickly. And that's just a reminder for our panelists as well. We want everyone to hear what you have to say. So speak slowly if you can. That will help us. So just some more logistics for you. We're going to have each panelist who has really fabulous things to tell you about the community network model that they have. 5 minutes. Sort of a speed round, if you will. And then the real deal is we'll have the conversation amongst everyone here and some of you in the audience. So we'll jump up and ask you, you can wave your hands if you have a question. Someone will have to keep us to time because I just want to hear about all the great things and I get lost sometimes. So we'll keep that going. Again, I'm Jane. To my right is Penny Carpenter from KNet. Her bio will be on our website soon so that you can actually see more. But she's a director vernacular on your nations, and that's because I'm ignorant of some of the ways to say this. But she's from a First Nations community near Ontario, and she'll tell you more about her project. But we have Matt Rantanen from the Southern California tribal communities. He works with 19 tribes there. His bio will be on the website too, and there's a cool blog out from him. That is Nico Pache from Argentina. He works with a group called Altermundi. You know the Cree Nations. He's working with that type of community on cable projects. So I'm going to turn it over to them because they're really the people you want to hear from. But again, wave at you a little, or Matt might help me wave at you. So over right now to Penny. Give her a round of applause, yeah? Come.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for welcoming us to your community. I'm very excited to be here because to me, the heart and soul of developing net, our broadband, is really with the community people themselves. Like, we started in the late 90s. So myself, I'll introduce myself. So I'm Penny Carpenter, and I live in Silicote, Ontario, which is a small town of 5,000 people. I'm a First Nation band member from Lac Seul First Nation, but my family grew up north of Silicote on a trap line, and my mother went to residential school. But I grew up in Silicote. I've been working for Kiwinaners, and we're a tribal council that initially supported 6 First Nations providing second-level services. In the late 90s, we as staff took a bus trip to Ottawa, which was about 25 hours, to visit different government people and different services. So we did go to this Ottawa Heart Institute, and that's where we saw telemedicine. And so our chiefs were like, that is what we need in our communities, because they lived in small, remote communities in Northern Ontario where they had limited health services, limited education services, and no connection. We actually had 2 communities that did not have phone service. They had one pay phone. One was on the outside of a band office building. So in the middle of the winter, it was 30 below, and you had to line up to make phone calls. And the other community had their phone in their band office, so it was a bit warmer to make that call. But nowadays, like, you all want to, like, everyone's sitting around here. Even on the bus, people were making calls or texting and sending messages. So everyone wants to be connected. And, like, people in communities are no different. They want to be connected. They want to talk to their families. They want to stay in touch with their children. So I think, like, our concept has always been supporting the First Nations we work for, and we take our direction from them. So it's all about community engagement, focusing on what the needs were in the community. So just moving ahead, when we first started, it was really, there was no, so if you had a phone service, you kind of had a dial-up connection. But that wasn't really enough to send, like, in the school, the teachers weren't able to get files. So we did focus on building the broadband, and so that was about 20 years ago. So fast forward to today, we have 20 communities that are now on fiber. These are remote communities, so just like Inuvik, the fiber runs into the community. So those communities are able to use 1 gig circuits, and some of them are wanting to move, they're demanding more bandwidth, every day. Our model has always been to be sort of the broadband supplier into the community and work with the community to develop their own local infrastructure. So they have cable plants in most of the communities, and they connect the homes, band offices, school, and health center. We have worked with them to provide fiber to the schools and to the health centers. Because there are demands, just like the gentleman before me, like health. If you get sick in a community, you don't have specialists, so you have to fly out to specialist appointments to major cities. So even for a 5-minute follow-up appointment, so it does take a lot out of you. It takes you away from your family, from your children, and sometimes people can't arrange to do those follow-up appointments, so they don't make it, so then their health deteriorates. So it's important to bring health to the community, so we do that through telemedicine, electronic medical records, electronic x-rays now. So you need a lot of bandwidth at the health center. Schools, provincial schools, they're using Google Chromebooks, Apple's video conferencing. So we have to meet those same demands in our schools. So because our schools only go to grade 8 and then they go out to high school into the provincial system. So we had to make sure they're at the same level as the provincial students. So we have to make sure the bandwidth is at the school. So we're, in Ontario, it's 1 meg per student. So we're trying to make those demands. It's not always that easy, but, those have been some of our challenges. And I guess, I'll bring it back to the community. It's all about the community and building that local capacity. So it's not us just bringing it in and providing these services. It's really just us bringing the broadband to the community and then having that capacity at the local community to run their own cable plants and connecting their homes, connecting the connections to the school, to the health center, building their local technicians so they have, doing the billing so they can hire staff to run it. Then they can provide cable TV or internet TV, or we do justice video. So there's a lot of services they can start delivering locally. At the health centers, to run all the IT at the health center, we have local community telemedicine coordinators, so they can run the telemedicine equipment. At the school, they're all using data management systems for school records, so they have data clerk. So it's really making sure that capacity is developed in the community and there's positions available and they're funded for those positions.
Wow. Okay, Penny is setting the stage here. She's fabulously on time for that speed round. And I should have said after Penny will be Mike, after Mike will be Nico, and then Matt will wrap up, and then we'll have the group discussion. And I should have said earlier that we're setting the stage for you on different models of community networks, Indigenous, First Nations, and in the United States, Native American, and in Nico's case, self-determined. So Mike Jolly is up from Cree Cable.
What'd Hello, my name is Michael Jolly. I thought sitting at the end, well, I'd get to go last, and didn't have to jump around like this. I'm actually going to start my timer because I probably could talk forever. I am from Moose Factory, Ontario. I belong to Inuvialuit. That's the First Nation I work for. I'm the director of IT. I actually started off in this industry accidentally. I was a teenager when cable TV came into our community, and my father and the organization I work for now brought it in. I worked as a summer student, as a trainee over the years working with the cable company, and didn't think I would ever become in the technology. I had other dreams and aspirations, but my path was designed for me, I guess, somewhat. I'm the director of IT. We have a hybrid fiber coax system. My coax plant is from the late 80s, and my fiber plant is from 2000. One of the challenges that we've had over the years, I guess, when the cable company came into existence was developing our own local expertise. In the 1990s, our cable company brought in a community-based training program from NATE. There were 10 students that took it, and I was one of them. I was the youngest one in the group. I didn't have any kids, so the instructors actually encouraged me to come out to Edmonton to do the full telecommunications program, and that's what I did. I've been in this industry since 1996. I worked for a local telco for 2 years, and then to the reluctance of my father, I applied for a job with him with the cable company. He told me, stay where you are. You'll end up with a full pension. You know, you'll be set for life there. But I always had this dream of working with my dad for one project. And it was only supposed to be a 1-year project. I was a FedNor intern for that 1 year, and that's 19 years later. So I started off as, like I said, as a cable tech trainee. Then, you know, I went to school and I came back. Then I was an intern, and then an IT tech. We did our fiber project in the year 2000. We ran 21 kilometers of fiber across Moose Factory, integrated our system into one, and offered broadband. We had a T1 coming in, and you know, that was a lot faster than dial-up, you know, 1.4544 megabit for our first 30 customers. Today we have, and I just confirmed with our finance lady, we have 500 customers on our cable plant right now, and we're offering up to 10 megs right now. And actually, we just completed our upgrade with assistance from KNet. I'm a KNet customer, so they provide the backbone to us, and my techs are all local techs. We do everything ourselves. We're the installers, we're the fiber guys, we maintain our plant. We also do IT support for some of the schools. It's another offshoot company that would end up creating, trying to generate revenue internally, you know, trying to stop the leakage of dollars. Also to empower our own people to take charge of this. You know, it's nice to have. I'm not one of those guys where someone can come in and tell me, well, this is how you can do it, and this is why you're going to do it. I don't roll that way. You know, I got to get my hands in there and understand fully how it works, because at the end of the day, I am the tech that's there. Me and my crew, we are there. We are on the ground. You know, it's funny when they talk about the internet, and when it goes off, everyone comes out. Well, my boys come running out of their rooms. You know, the internet's not working. I can't game right now. What's going on? Go and fix it. So those are the challenges that we have, type of stuff. Yeah, so that's what we do. Like I said, we do IT support now to 3 of the schools. We don't have every business in our community. We have primarily our customers are all residence-based, the residential customers. The business customers has always been a challenge for us, and we compete against Bell. And I tell my guys every day, I said, Bell has an engineer, a design, an installer, a maintainer. I said, I have you. You know, and that's one of the things that you know, I'm grateful for our community that do support us. It's a learning curve. It's a huge learning curve. We've seen fluctuations where Ontario is faster than us, so customers will go there, and then all of a sudden they'll come back. Social media, I hate it. I hate it with a passion, because the moment something goes wrong, the first thing people go on social media is to say, Cree cable is slow. Anyways, there's my 5 minutes. I'm at the end, so you know where to find me.
And I should say that the elders who spoke earlier spoke about humans, right? All of this technology does not exist without all of you and people. And we often will say that when we're building infrastructure, wherever we are, in other countries as well, it's the human trust factor between people. I can be on a video conference with any of you and then come here to meet you and you see me, what we say, eye to eye, person to person. And those human trust networks get built and relationships and actually projects get done. So that was one thing I wanted to say before we turn to Nico. And the other thing is you've heard about technology that uses land, like the animals, they walk on the land, right? Those packets that we're talking about, the internet packages and all that content, running over the earth. There are some packages that fly through the air. This is our mobile, right? A bit, some of the mobile flies, and the Wi-Fi. And then some of the packets will go under the sea in the undersea cables, maybe up in Tuktoyaktuk, right? And in Maine, where we have cables that go into the water. But if I'm sending a message to someone in another country, it's swimming, right, with whales, to get to where it needs to go. And it might go with a caribou, right? When it swims to the land, that whale's not jumping out of the water, but think of him as doing that, handing off the packages to the caribou or to the other animals. So we've talked about 2 land-based connectivity packages with the animals. Now we're going to turn to Nico from Argentina to talk a little bit about the air and some of the work that they're doing in a self-determined network.
So hi, I'm Nico. I'm coming from quite far from here, actually Mexico, but I come from Argentina. And I actually will come a little bit back to what was Jane's talking about, the network of people. Because the way, so Altermundi, the organization that I belong, that I'm part of, we work towards supporting communities that want to build infrastructure by themselves. It's basically trying to shift these power structures that we struggle so much about, like the top-down solutions of telecommunications infrastructure and all the other infrastructure that we depend on. But for us, like the technical tools are already there to deal with all of these things, you know, like energy, we have renewable energies, like in wireless, we have the fiber, and all of the technical things are over there to deal with these things. But usually, the most complex parts are related together to actually accomplish these things. So we have been working for around 6 years, and together and getting things done by themselves, but create like the most challenging parts of it. It's helping the people actually realizing that they can accomplish things together. Our prototype network, let's say the most relevant one, or the one that we talk more about it, is Quintana Libre. I'm actually a spokesperson. It's not that I have been doing these things. All the heroes are. So Quintana is a rural Western community. We are not a First Nation, but we have a lot of struggles like you. So we are in 35 minutes from the closest city. They have fiber. We don't have connectivity at all. This is a mountain territory. It's not like huge mountains, but huge enough for us to struggle with connectivity. And our communities, like 5 years ago, they said, okay, we need connectivity. We are in this 21st century, and we need to have this. They organized, they got together, and they used wireless technologies, actually mesh wireless technologies, to build a network for themselves, by themselves, but bottom up. And the particularity of this network is that it's self-managed. It's managed by every member of the community. So it's not that we got together and we entitled a subgroup of that group of users to deal with the connectivity, but we said, let's get together and put a little bit of effort, each of us, and make the infrastructure work for ourselves. It's much more challenging because network, as you know, network infrastructure has a lot of skills to develop. So what we've done is develop technologies that actually don't require so many technical skills to be maintained. And that's the LibreMesh project. It's an open source LibreMesh and LibreRouter. We will talk about, and if you're interested, you can just ping me about that. It's an open source software and open source hardware mesh technology for non-technical people. So, and this allows people not only to deploy infrastructure the same way we put our TV dish on the roof of our houses, but also to maintain it, to grow it, and to be able to govern it. So what these people have accomplished in these 6 years of existence is not only creating a network for themselves and allowing 90 houses and their neighbors to be connected to the internet, but also based on that experience, the neighboring villages said, hey, we want that too. So right now we are a cluster of 6 villages that are not only connected to internet but with each other and collaborating with each other to accomplish that task. And by doing that, we are achieving not only economical, not only feasibility at the economical level. It's really, really, really cheap, like orders of magnitude cheaper than any other provider. But also, we are accomplishing without needing someone else to do it for us. The community members do it by themselves, and this is an accomplishment on its own, in the sense that they were able to organize themselves without asking someone else to do it for them. So for your communities, the context here is completely different, like budget-wise and organizational-wise. You are already organized, but being able to do it in that way, I guess it's also an example of how another structure that you can choose to use to organize and get connected by yourself. Anyway, 5 minutes, 20 seconds. Back to Jane.
So we're hearing about different models and projects, and 2 were cable and fiber, Indigenous owned, First Nations to the east, yeah. Nico is the project with self-determined communities in Argentina, mesh networking meaning over the air, some down on the ground, but mostly through the air. And now Matt from Southern California is working with 19 tribal communities, which is the words we use in the US for communities. Matt, you want to come up or sit? Okay.
Good morning. Good morning? Good morning. Okay. Delayed, good. So I'm Matt Rantanen. I'm from Southern California. I'm actually from all over the place. We were trying to figure out how to describe me. So I think an expatriate Cree from Alberta living in the US. How's that? My family moved into northern Idaho 120 years ago and stayed, and the rest of my family comes from Norway and Finland, so that's why I'm so, as I am. I work with 19 tribal communities in Southern California, and we, 17 years ago, took on the task of building connectivity to these communities. Now, I went to Tuk yesterday. It was fabulous. It's a long ways from everything else on the planet, and interestingly enough, we have that very same experience of isolation and lack of services right next to San Diego, California, San Diego City, California, just 35 minutes from the city border. We have absolutely the same lack of services and lack of options for connectivity, sometimes for running water, electricity, telephone, and it's an indigenous situation. It's universal globally. Aboriginal folks, Maori folks that I've worked with all the way on the other side of the globe, on the bottom of the equator, different folks all over the world are in the same spot. So what we're doing today is actually thinking forward and solving this problem, though we're looking at Inuvik and Tuk, we are in this region, we are actually solving problems that are replicated and used to fix the rest of the indigenous populations in the world. So, you know, I'm very happy to be here. The network that we developed in Southern California, we didn't have access to fiber, and we didn't have a cable system like some of these here. We had pretty much dial-up, right? So the old dial-up phone line scenarios, and we were trying to get away from that. And we got an infusion of money from a Hewlett-Packard grant early on, and it was a lucky opportunity because they don't have any money anymore. They were philanthropic at one point, as most companies were. They're a little tight right now. And they gave some money to be able to develop community resource programs. So as you guys have after-school programs and resource programs for your youth to study and help with math and science and things, we developed these programs for each of our reservations. And the problem was that they weren't connected to anything or each other. So as an afterthought, and then I showed up, they said, you know, we need to have this connected. And there was a gentleman by the name of Hans Werner Braun who worked out of the supercomputer center that was in San Diego, and he had brought internet connectivity across a couple of our reservations to grab earthquake data coming back from an active earthquake. They could monitor it at the university and find out what the information was. It was very helpful for them to catch that in real time to know how to react. Well, in trade of going across a couple of reservations, he connected a couple of resource programs, and it was a big difference. So we replicated some of the work that he did, got this grant, and built out this wireless network that supported 19 communities, and have built it 3.5 times based on the increases in technology. We have 23 towers, 20 of them running on the sun, completely off the grid of electricity. Luckily, we are blessed with a little bit of solar in Southern California. Although with the change in weather that we've been seeing over the last 2 decades, we've seen storms that last long enough to knock our batteries out. So we've had to resort to backup generators and such. So there are many models to create networks, right? We've seen a bunch of different ones today. There are several others in the room, actually, very good examples. There's a lot of people running fiber to the individual home. That's really tough to do in the geography that you're presented with here, but running fiber to a town and then deploying it wirelessly or deploying it with another method is an opportunity. In Southern California, it's the same problem. We go from the beach to 6,000 feet in the mountains, and most of the tribes are at the base of the valleys of those mountains. And it poses a problem for digging fiber or hanging fiber in those communities. So we've resorted to wireless, and we used a fixed microwave directional wireless to from point A to point B, or from point A to B, C, D, E, F, right? So one thing talks to many things, rather than some of the technology that Nico talked about is to everybody. It's a mesh. It's a living, breathing thing that learns its own path to the internet. It's kind of cool. We're going to hopefully be working together shortly, and we're more than happy to sit on the side at break, go through some network designs. We have pictures, we have diagrams, we have things that we're more than happy to share. So, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So we've got a bit of a snapshot for you of some different models and ways that things could be done. We're going to ask some questions now of the panelists, or I am, and then please we'll open it up for questions from any of you. So I would like to start with you, Penny. Do you do any local training to make sure you have sustainability from the technical side?
So at KNET, since we've been around for since 2000, we have developed local workers to provide training. So the way we support cable plants right now is we have a local cable plant specialist. So if there's needed training on site, he'll go travel to the community to train new tech. There's always staff turnover, so train staff. Or we'll actually, once a year, we have our own cable plant training workshop in Silicote, so they come out and train us.
So back to that human factor. If you want to sustain your network, you need the funding, you need the people, you also need that political will sometimes, and it can be community First Nations council will, and then dealing with maybe the federal government on occasion. You're federal in Canada, hopefully not mine, but you've got different governance factors, yeah? And we often talk about community networks around the world as a bottom-up governance model, whether it's self-determined, tribal, First Nations, Inuit, other. You have that role of how you sustain it on your own terms. We're not going to tell you there's one way, because there is no one way. As you all know, animals will take a path that you don't think is necessarily the right path, right? We all came across the field today. We didn't take a road, right? We cut across, we saw the building. So sometimes you have to do this with technology, other times you figure out what's going to work. Mike, what was one of the hardest things for you in building out your network?
Where I live. So for our network, we had to do a 21-kilometer fiber link from Moosonee to Moose Factory. So that was probably one of the, I guess, physical challenges that we had to do. We also, it's a learning curve, so we actually had to invest within our own techs to try and get them up to speed. And to be honest with you, Google has a lot of good information out there. Someone else has already had the problem. So we've managed to make things work, and it's not an easy task. Sometimes our worst critics are our own people. You know, that you know, you can't do this, or it can't be done type stuff. Well, we've been doing this for 19 years. So, you know, we have that. I mean, it's not easy, and you have to have thick skin. You're in the community, and someone is criticizing something that you put together. You know, for me, I've been there from the start. So I look at Cree Cable, the internet side of things is my child type thing. And it is hard when, you know, you have someone that can be critical of, well, you guys don't have the expertise, you know, things like that. So that's, I guess, it's not so much as a, you know, a challenge in terms of resources. You know, we've been fortunate enough that we've been able to squirrel a little bit of money away for all the minor upgrades that we've done. I mean, we've done 5 upgrades when our customers don't even realize that. We've never changed our rates for our customer. Our customer's rate has always been the same. So we've reinvested our money, you know, as bandwidth has become cheaper. That was the other challenge is you know, the connectivity that we have. You know, it's great that KNET provides that to us, and they still have to use somebody else to get to us. And that is a challenge right there, because we were stuck at 300 megs for about almost 4 years. The local telco, the last mile coming to us, couldn't upgrade. They weren't willing to upgrade. They were right in the midst of a sale, and we couldn't upgrade. And you know, they could upgrade. They did all their own upgrades, but no, not for us. And we saw an impact with our subscriber base. We saw customers leaving us. So those are some of the challenges that we face.
Thank you. Nico, can you for a minute talk about the project in Mexico and Oaxaca with the indigenous community, and why it's not yet connected to the internet, but how they sustain it, and if people pay for service?
The internet project. Okay, so 2 years ago, so we have the pleasure to have the Maria here that can speak better about this project than me. But so I joined Redes, a Mexican organization to support 4 First Nation communities in Mexico. The project was related to working together with them in order to support them in what they wanted to do in relation to having connectivity. Not having connectivity per se, but actually accomplish something else, that is dealing with the issues that they wanted to deal with through connectivity in a way. So when that was actually our first thought, but while walking the walk with them, the actual needs were completely different than connectivity per se. For example, one of the communities, they wanted to have a TV station. It was not internet. It was, but having a TV station was quite expensive and also require licenses. And so we work with them for them to get the knowledge to have an online TV station. And not, so they had infrastructure already there to do streaming. Like they have internet connectivity, there were wireless networks around the community, so it was not difficult to get to the internet, but it was difficult to broadcast. So instead of using broadcasting technology, we used internet streaming, and they are now like streaming every week all the celebrations and all the basketball matches, and it's quite popular. And this is because the First Nation communities in Mexico, they work with something that they call felt needs. So it's kind of, you feel it in the air, like we as a community, we want this. Then all the community works together towards that object, that target. And the resources kind of appear. I mean, we applied for a Beyond the Net funding from ISOC, and we were lucky to get it. And through that, so the Tlahuitoltepec community, they are doing the TV station. The Yaviche community, in their hand, they are in the same territory, Oaxaca. It's a very mountainous territory. They wanted to cultivate their culture. So it was not connectivity again. It was, we want to work on our culture. We want to nurture our culture. We want to promote it. We want kids to know about it. So the way we supported them dealing with it was getting digital skills, like learning how to do interviews, how to take photos, how to do video, how to do, and having a local server, a local repository, culture repository, where they can store and share that content with their community. And again, we had the Beyond the Net fund, but the community said, we want to own this process. So if something happens, if any need appears, they will deal with it. And the two other communities were actually about connectivity, and this was kind of an interesting thing. One of them, this is a learning, like we learned something about it. We involved the non-tribal government in the process, and the non-tribal. So because there was a budget limitation, we were not going to be able to deal with the problem at hand. So the community said, we can ask the non-tribal government for funding for supporting this. And the non-tribal government said, yeah, of course, we will pay for you for this. You just pay for it, and we will reimburse it. Have you received any money? We haven't. So and it was a struggle, because this is a kind of a really, really poor community, so they had no means to deal with it. So, but we are figuring it out. The thing is that right now they have connectivity, and they are getting to do, in particular, educational content, like the e-learning platform that you have here, but in a much more simple approach.
Thank you for that. And one question I had, we'll come to later with Maria, was whether or not people pay for the service. So I'm going to flip to Matt. Matt, I know you went from a grant-based system after Hewlett-Packard and others. How did you transition to be more sustainable as a community-based network from grant-based to pay-for?
So as you're building out these resources and you get subsidies and federal funding or local funding, private funding, to be able to deploy this network, you realize that there's a cost to keeping it alive. There's a cost monthly to provide your bandwidth, your traffic back to the rest of the world. There's a cost to do research and development on future growth. You have to manage your power systems, your electrical component. There are community members that disagree with you, and rather than verbal, Mike, they go out with a splitting maul and they break all your solar panels. So then you have to recover from that. So at some point you realize there are no grants perpetual grants that last forever. Grant isn't a forever thing. I know tribal communities in the U.S. tend to live off of these things until they become financially stable, and hopefully they can learn to transition away from it. What's happened is, in our situation, is we realized that a free service is not valued as much as a paid service. I don't know why that works that way, but as soon as we added a dollar figure to the internet connectivity to your home, people began to respect it and create it like a utility out of it. And they paid their bill on time, and they called it with issues. They asked about upgrades. And before, when it was free, they were like, it was either on or it's off, or it's not great. They didn't really respect it. It kind of works. But then when they started paying for it, then they started actually watching the value of it and realizing the value of it. So the dynamic was really bizarre. We realized that we were going to have to charge somebody to be able to recoup the costs that we were outputting regularly to support the network. So we have 105 tribal municipalities over the 19 communities connected. That'd be libraries, schools, Head Start programs, tribal administration, environmental protection agency, utilities, fire departments, tribal police. And then we have roughly 350 homes, and we're trying to expand out to about 2,400 homes. So we started a program where the initial ideas of the Tribal Digital Village Network was that the tribal community government operating bodies would have access to free internet so that they could use that resource to develop their community. And most of those communities don't have economic development projects, so that would be an expense they couldn't afford, so they wouldn't do it. When it came to the tribal home, with the valuation of the product, it made more sense to charge them a monthly fee for that service and that connectivity. And it grew the network to a different level of respect. It also started bringing in a small stream of cash that brought us more close to sustainability. And as Mike said, I've squirreled away a few nuts for the winter, and so we're able to grow our network without reaching out to grants and subsidies. We do get a federal subsidy to support our schools and libraries, and that's really a key component. It's really helped us grow, but with a kind of weird-looking business model, which I can draw on a piece of paper for you, we are able to sustain the network itself with the incoming funding that we have as a stream. We don't necessarily sustain all of our salaries, but as we know in Indian country, where we wear multiple hats because there's few of us that do a lot of work.
Penny, for you, you work with anchor institutions. Can you talk about why that's important?
Sure. Yeah, our model has been developed to support health centers, schools, and businesses, and the police, and other service organizations. So those are really the key anchor tenants to running a local community ISP. I'm sure Mike could tell you that also. So the more you have, the bigger organizations paying that connectivity bill. And so KNET is the one we're bringing the pipe to the community, and then we're billing the community for that pipe. But so they have to have those key anchor tenants to pay most of the pipe. So then what they bill out to their homes, it could be $30 a month or $50 a month. So something that's affordable to the community residents.
And Mike, do you have anchor tenants like schools, libraries, and health centers?
I only have one school on my network. Hopefully that will change. For the businesses, basically it's primarily the very, very small ones that have, like, say, maybe under five employees there. Most of my own organizations and entities belong on our network, so which would be our Eco Lodge, our cable office, my political organization, Inuvialuit. I did a rough calculation and then realized that probably only 3% of my subscribers are business. Primarily, it's the residential users that we have that support our organization. So, which is kind of I've always looked at the model and said, well, you know, if we could get more businesses on our network, that we could, you know, recoup a lot of give them the better premium bandwidth, so that way we can have more bandwidth available at nighttime when all the residential users are online. But unfortunately, it's not in my case. I worked with Brian at one time for the hospital. They were on our network. We ran a fiber optic cable to the hospital. But we were not able to upgrade our bandwidth back then. And then we ended up losing them as a customer because the local telco could offer them more bandwidth than we could at that time. So that's the challenge for us, is really trying to get into the business market. You know, we have the expertise, we have the capabilities to do it. It's just right now it's primary residential that's on our network.
Thank you. And what happened to you and your network when gaming and content became a big thing? So this social media stuff. Welcome to content and your network.
Well, yeah. It's supply and demand, basically. I mean, the generation that is coming up now, we look at our youth. When we started as an ISP, we had one computer and one laptop per household. Today, every home, and I'll use my sons as an example, and my kids, okay? They have their iPad, their Xbox, and their iPhone sitting on my network while they're busy doing all that simultaneously. A lot of our homes are seeing that the generation that's coming up is the digital generation. They're always connected. They want everything now. You know, so that's where we've seen a huge impact on our bandwidth, and we had to be creative in how we can't afford to keep buying more bandwidth as we get saturated. You know, so we had to be creative in looking at innovative ways in terms of caching some of the content. Now we tried to be non-intrusive as possible. The other thing too is we had to upgrade our CMTS. I'm on my 5th CMTS. That's what manages all my cable modems that are out there. I'm on number 5 already, and
yeah, what's a CMTS?
A CMTS. So in the wireless world, they have their wireless antennas and wireless devices, type stuff. So CMTS is a cable modem termination system. So it's a little box that sits in your house. That box manages your connection to my network, and I go through, like I said, I'm on my 5th CMTS now. Never charged it back to my customers. Basically, our rate has stayed the same. So you talk about gaming. Gaming is social media, Netflix, Apple TV. I mean, my bandwidth consumption has grown. I've seen my data for my residential users. Back then, 5-10 megs a month. I looked at my graph and I had someone hit 100 gigs, and that was about 4 years ago. I've seen this shift for the consumption, and every home is moving up and up towards the higher echelon now, and that is the challenge. I mean, that's what we see.
And when he's talking about bandwidth, it's the capacity over the infrastructure. So it might be like this, narrow, in the beginning when it's a single type of service. And you add all these other things and it grows. And if the network lines are little and the bandwidth and the content grows, the network management is really important because you have to figure out a way to get all that traffic through there. The videos, the voice data, and the other. So that's network management 101. It's a hard thing when you've got more content coming in and your network isn't upgraded. And I'm going to have Matt go after you, but back to you, Mike, for a sec.
Just one quick, right now my community is pulling 600 megs.
That's a lot.
Last night we probably hit about 770 megs.
Which is a lot of traffic.
So this is what the traffic, and like I said, primarily all of it is residential for me.
Excellent. Matt, you want to add?
I just wanted to add a little tidbit. So one of the things that we get criticized most about when we're building these community networks is that the people that sometimes fund this or support you with a subsidy or things like that, they always criticize the fact that you're building out a network essentially so people can watch Netflix or streaming media, movies and such. And I just turn that right back in their face and say, well, we didn't choose to live on this reservation. We were put on this reservation, and the resources are not here that were promised, and this is the United States case specifically. And so if a family that has maybe one vehicle that needs to be used for somebody that works in the house or taking to school, wanted to take their family to the movies, 45 minutes to an hour away, and spend roughly $100 to get their 4 or 5 members of that family in their vehicle, and expend a lot of time out of their day to take them to the movies, and maybe that's a resource they don't have, a money resource they don't have. If we can get them broadband that can support Netflix at what, $12 or something a month, whatever that charge is per month, and they can watch a movie at home with their family and keep that family unit together and not occupy the car and take up 4 or 5 hours of time just to do one event, that's worth every dime if you ask me.
Thank you. Nico, in your village in Argentina, you connect to a university network. Can you explain what that is and how that connection works?
Yeah, so affordability is a very relevant problem, and in my village we don't have much economical support for this kind of infrastructure. So we had to find innovative ways to access uplink, to access to our backhaul. At the beginning, one of our community members was actually working in the telecommunications industry, and he had as clients one of the tier 2 providers. So for a year they supported us by giving away a certain amount of megabits for free for us. But after that deal was over, we approached the closest university, the National University of Cordoba, and of course, I mean, most, like bandwidth is purchased as like a cap. You have a roof, but it's not purchased by the amount of data that you move through it. It's the amount of data that you can move through it. So most of the universities have unused bandwidth. I mean, everyone has unused bandwidth because you're never using the maximum bandwidth. But in particular, universities, they purchase in very big bulks, and most of the time they are not using it. Basically, during non-school hours, no one uses the bandwidth that is already there. So we got an agreement with the university where the university provides us free bandwidth, limited bandwidth during the day, so they can use the bandwidth that they have for their own needs. But during the night, they give us all the bandwidth that they have. We can only use part of it because we are a wireless network, so the wireless links are quite limited to bring bandwidth to us. But this is the agreement has been on for a few years already, and enhancing the links have allowed us to connect everyone basically for free. I mean, the money that we put on our network is to sustain the infrastructure that we already deployed, not to pay for the bandwidth that we have available. And yeah, that's a very interesting partnership.
Thank you. Is anyone here from Sabera? Robin, yeah? Is that Rob? No. Yep. Yes. Robin is with a research and education network in Edmonton, yes? Ish, Alberta. You might want to talk to him if you're interested in what national research and education networks do. They're very important pipes or roads for connectivity, big roads. They can take a lot of content with them. So we have about 5 minutes, so one more round each, if you can keep it to a minute. Penny, I want to start with you. What is your next step with KNet? What are you thinking for the network?
So we do have a lot of challenges with our network. So like Mike has said, the demand for bandwidth has increased. Like when we first started at putting the pipes in the communities, they were just 1.5 megs. Now in a lot of the communities, we have fiber going to the communities, so they're buying gig circuits, and now they're planning to buy 2 gig circuits and then 10 gigs. So all of our network is a managed broadband network. Then we bring all of our circuits to 151 Front Street in Toronto. We buy bulk internet, and we interconnect to like the Ministry of Justice to provide different services. So that whole infrastructure costs lots of money. You know, we're just a small network, so there's challenges to keep upgrading the equipment and maintaining it. There's now ongoing service costs with all the equipment that you purchase, so it is a big challenge to really balance everything and balance the needs of the community, as they also want to continue to upgrade their cable plants. Some communities will be starting to get fiber to the home, so that of course will require more bandwidth. So I just, and then like I don't know who's from Canada, but there has been a few broadband pots of funding over the last couple of years. The first round of funding, like we did put in several applications, and really just one small $50,000 application was awarded. And the second round, so far we have one that's awarded to buy C-band satellite space for our two most northerly communities that are still on C-band satellite. So there's always a challenge in writing proposals, looking for funding to assist communities to upgrade, and just and then just knocking on government doors to change policies, keep track of policies. Like I'm just a small staff of 18 people. Most of them are just you know, the NOC technicians or the service desk technicians. So to keep updated and know what CRTC is doing, or ISID is doing, is really a challenge. So we have joined forces across Canada with the First Mile Consortium, which is a group of researchers and First Nation networks working together on different projects. So just keeping that and maintaining that. Thank you.
It's a big job. Nico, in 1 minute, can you tell us about what you're thinking next for your project with LibreMesh and LibreRouter, what the next steps are?
So the LibreRouter project is basically this piece of hardware where communities can deploy their own infrastructure just by putting these devices on their roofs and targeting to their neighbors and in a mesh structure. The project is coming out at the end of this year, and the following steps for the project are related to getting the word out, to getting more communities involved in this build it yourself infrastructure, but also understanding better the needs of other communities that we want to serve. I mean, we don't only want to provide infrastructure, like reliable infrastructure that is owned by our communities in the way we use it. But let's say if we are going to work with MAT, we need to understand how MAT drives how MAT's community works with their own infrastructure to provide them with the tools that allow them to work in the way they work. So that's one of the things, and the other thing is getting the devices everywhere in the planet. So that's one big challenge, like logistically. We want to work with all of you to make sure that the device gets where it needs to be at the most affordable price possible and to the most remote places that we can get it.
Thank you. Matt, what's next for your network?
So let me go with what's current, and that is to increase our quality of service. And what I mean by that is network reliability as far as uptime and quality of throughput. And our biggest challenge today is the sun and its lack of availability currently with weather patterns that are moving through San Diego. So we are shoring up our solar systems with generators that have been graciously donated by Vince Cerf. Some of you who know who that is, through his efforts at Google. And we have been putting out propane generators to support our battery backups to make sure that our solar power stays up during 7 to 10 days of clouds, when 17 years ago we had maybe 3 days of clouds. So that's one of the big shifts that's happening. The other is migrating into some of the unlicensed or license exempt spectrums that are available in the United States that are exploratory at this point, beta version, if you will, not quite proven on the ground. We're playing around with the TV white space with 3 manufacturers, and I think the 3rd manufacturer that we're going with will be the one that maybe changes this whole game, and we are hopefully going to be lucky enough to be one that gets to demonstrate that first, the change in what they're doing with TV whitespace, and then potentially working with Nico and some of the changes there or the add-ons that they can do to the Libra router and maybe getting the Libra router into the TV whitespace in the US.
So you see, we're having the discussion about the people, the technology, the development of infrastructure and sustainability and governance, and sometimes it's bottom up. And there'll be other panels talking about this very important issue of how to deal with policy at a meta at the biggest level, maybe at the council level, because you've got push and pull to open up ways for you to build these networks better without having restrictions, barriers to that connectivity, whether it's from the federal side or even land rights issues. Mike, you're last but not least, because we wanted to finish with a First Nations community.
So our next evolution of our network is fiber to the home. We've been working on this project for about 5 years now. We've finally seen the technology somewhat stabilizing. Originally when we looked at it, we were taking bits and pieces of 1, 2, and 3 and trying to make it all work because we weren't sure how it was going to go. Now that we have more of a general idea, our GPON network has been designed, but in a way that we can, if we have to, run a fiber. So GPON was taking 1 fiber and splitting it to 16 homes, 32 homes type thing. We're also designing it in a way that if we have to eventually run a fiber to every home, we can do it in the next network. So we're planning for the future. Because when we did our last upgrade, one of our consultants said, well, this is the last upgrade you will ever need. Well, that's not the case. Technology is going to be forever growing, and we want to make sure that we are positioning ourselves for the future so that way we can have the best network. And I believe, it doesn't matter how big our communities or how small our Indigenous communities are, that we should have the best network. And that's the direction and leadership that my board has taken. And that is the tune that our techs march to, that we want the best. It doesn't matter how far we are or how remote we are. We should have the best technology, and we are marching forward with that.
And just to say, whether you're rural, remote, or urban, and it's underserved, that's where we're trying to aim for. Connectivity for everyone, anywhere, with a human factor. Oh, we're going to close soon. Go.
So we have a third world problem, but we are going for the first world solution. We're not going to go through all the iterations of the internet that have happened to get where we are today in the bigger communities that have this access. We are going from third world problem to that first world solution. We're not going to gap out all that old history.
Right. We're not talking about not good enough, but we are talking about ways to do that and bring that technology to as many people as possible. So you've heard from a fabulous panel of people about their different models, and it's setting the stage for us, so please give them a round of applause.
Thank you so much. Thanks for coming. Awesome, right on. Thank you, Matt, Nico, Penny, Mike, and the moderator, Jane. We're a few minutes behind, but I just want to do a couple housekeeping things here. We have a 5-minute flash presentation. Throughout the event, we're going to have a few of these very quick presentations. The direction of this conference, this summit, is something that you're doing in your community or that you feel would add to it. Talk to Mark about getting onto one of these 5-minute flash presentations. I know that if you find it interesting and your colleagues do, you know, come on up here and say a few words. Also, don't be afraid to get the business cards of the folks that were up on panel here, or that the folks that you rode in to Tuck on the bus with. Chances are, you know, these are going to be your colleagues, these are going to be your clients, your customers, and you know, maybe your vendors. So get some business cards. We're going to have a short networking break, but first I want to move around the agenda. So if you're looking at it now, you're probably expecting to see Stephen Barry from CIRA, so the Canadian Internet Registration Authority, but because Michelle Beck from Telsat is going to be leaving tomorrow, we wanted to invite her up for a quick 5-minute presentation. So Michelle, if you're in around here, now's your time to come on up and spend some 5 minutes here. And then after that, we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to resume with the morning panel, the other one. Thank you. Do you have a presentation? Oh, yes.
Do I have control up here, or are you guys flip through it?
I can get it for you.
You'll flip through?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning. I'll have to lower this. So just to the next slide, or the next two, I guess. I'm very glad to be here this morning to talk to you just very briefly about One Telesat and some of the projects that we're working on, bringing broadband connectivity to rural and remote areas. Canada. We brought telephone service back in the early 70s on our Anik A1 satellite, again, to the four corners of satellite. And we have been innovating our services ever since. So we have today a fleet of 17 GEO satellites flying one LEO prototype satellite, which is low Earth orbiting, and that's something that's very exciting, and I'll speak to that just a little bit later in the presentation. And we're currently deploying a number of new high throughput satellites. And that's one of our latest projects that we're providing gigabits worth of capacity throughout Nunavut. So next slide, please. So one thing that's fairly unique about Telesat is we are very customer-centric. We're innovative. For a fairly small Canadian company that started off as a Canadian company, we have grown globally, and we have been the leader in satellite technologies ever since. So very proud. Operational efficiency, we use some of the latest and greatest technologies to bring and deliver satellite connectivity, broadband connectivity to customers in Canada, North America, but around the world. And we do provide end-to-end services. So next slide, please. Keep going. So we're North American focused. Our Annex satellites, we have 3 of them, so we provide diversity and connectivity throughout rural and remote regions, C-band mostly to rural communities. So that's been our workhorse up until fairly recently. It continues to be operational, providing great service, but we have just recently launched high throughput satellites. Now the high throughput satellites can deliver gigabits worth of connectivity to communities. And today we're working on a project throughout Nunavut where Telesat is managing the deployment of earth stations across the 25 communities in Nunavut. And we are delivering, and some of the communities are actually operational today. So we're delivering gigabits worth of connectivity. It's allowing the deployment of 15 megabit per second service to each and every household throughout Nunavut, the launch of LTE mobility services in all of the communities, and broadband high-speed connectivity to all of the institutions, again, throughout Nunavut. So we're very, very proud to be part of that. The Northwest Tel received some government funding for the earth stations and contracted Telesat to help them deploy. So from the point that they received their funding to today, we have actually deployed or will be deploying, will be concluding the deployment in the 25 communities in the December timeframe. So 1 year from basically the funding to, frankly, the in-service of all of those 25 earth stations. So we can be fairly quick, time to market, to light up that capacity. Next slide. So we do know that there are about 2.4 million households in Canada that are currently underserved. It's not just in the north, it's in the mid-north, and in fact, some of the southern regions just outside of very urban cores. So we are to continue actually operate much closer to Earth, not like the geo satellites. And LEO satellites can support broadband connectivity in the 20 to 60 milliseconds worth of delay. So very similar to fiber networks. So that's the first thing that is really interesting about thing is they operate globally. And we're making use of new frequencies. We're making use of brand new technologies to enable broadband capability, not just within North America, but around the globe. And a lot of the remote communities can actually take or gain the benefits from this scale of operation and basically ride the coattails. And we can deliver not just gigabits, not just hundreds of gigabits, but terabits of capacity in any one region. So if you keep going. So this is what our constellation looks like. It's a series of polar orbiting satellites, and there's a layer of equatorial satellites, which kind of enhances the connectivity and delivers even that much more capacity and bandwidth to various regions. On top of that, we're implementing some very new, innovative features to our constellation. Direct radiating satellites, which allows you to focus the capacity into communities or region that needs it. And that can be assigned even on a dynamic basis, which allows for tremendous flexibility. The other thing that we're doing is we're making use of board processing, which allows for full mesh connectivity. So any point to any point on Earth can communicate, again, which, you know, sometimes there are limitations. And the other advanced technology feature is optical satellite links, inter-satellite links, so that we can communicate satellite to satellite. So go up, connect with the satellite, and come down again anywhere, any point on Earth. So the nice feature about that is, and it could be routed to any one of the adjacent satellites on this constellation. So this satellite network becomes a global mesh network. Similar to the internet network on the ground, the satellite constellation is a mesh network in the sky, delivering terabits and gigabits of connectivity anywhere. So it's highly resilient, very redundant, has a lot of capacity, very low cost because we have the scale of the deployment and we're making use of the latest technologies and capabilities. And the interesting thing is we can hit any single point on Earth with small antennas. And those antennas, the model that we're promoting is community aggregation. And that's the model that we've deployed in Nunavut and frankly elsewhere in the regions that we operate. And we feel that is one of the most efficient ways of delivering broadband trunks and services to communities, and then relying on the local infrastructure to hit the households, the institutions locally. So if you want to just keep going. So again, the features of this LEO constellation: capability of delivering high throughput connectivity, very low cost because of the scale, global connectivity. So we're solving not just the problems here in Canada, North America, but certainly worldwide. It's plug-and-play technology, so Metro Ethernet standards is what we're vying for. So it's plug-and-play. It's an Ethernet connection once you hit the community outside of the satellite modem. It's very simple to install and operate. Low latency, again, 20 to 60 milliseconds of latency delay. It's flexible, scalable, and what we're going to be able to do is add satellites. So as demand grows around the globe for our satellite bandwidth, we're going to just add several satellites in any one plane, and we can increment the bandwidth very easily. And then it has unmatched resiliency. Again, very similar to the mesh networks that you have on the ground. We can do that very similarly up in the sky. And any one of the Earth stations on the ground will be able to tune to any one of the satellites that's in its visible arc. And so if there is one failure of a satellite, it can quickly bounce to another one, and it can do that automatically. Highly resilient network. Next slide, please. So time frame. So right now, highlighted just in the blue, lighter blue, 2018. So we're going through a risk management phase where we're testing and designing the satellite. We have a number of manufacturers that are bidding for this project, but on a competitive basis. And we are going to de-risk this. We're taking a very commercial view to the deployment of this network. And so at the end of 2018, early 2019, we're going to pick the best supplier and the best solution for this network. At the same time, we are testing all of the ground terminal equipment, and then we'll be working with a number of suppliers there to get the best solutions. 2019 throughout 2020, 2021, we will be deploying and manufacturing all of the satellites. We're going to start to deploy Earth stations to be ready for service launch in 2022. Keep going, please. And so our view here is that our LEO constellation meets and actually beats frankly, most of the policy objectives that are set out both here in Canada, but also in the US in terms of connectivity, minimum connectivity per household. And we'll be able to grow and to meet that as the applications and services evolve. So we're quite excited about this, and I'm happy to talk to anyone about the model and the approach of our LEO constellation. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Thanks, Michelle. That was very interesting. Before we go on our break, I just wanted to make a couple of announcements. An event like this isn't possible for a single organization to pull together. So we actually have a number of partners that we worked with, and I'd like to acknowledge them now, including the First Mile Connectivity Consortium, the Inuvialuit Regional Corporation, the town of Inuvik, and the University of Alberta. They were tremendously helpful for us to pull this together. I'd also like to acknowledge our sponsors for the event. We have a number of organizations who really made this possible. And they include Canary, the Canadian Internet Registration Authority, Cybera, Google, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, Iristel, and Ice Wireless, who, for those of you who are roaming right now, they've graciously provided us with SIM cards to pop in your phone, which are available in the back in the conference bags. Also, Telsat is a sponsor, and OneWeb. So I'd like to acknowledge them and thank them for their support. And one last thing, we also partnered with a group called Northern Public Affairs to produce a special issue of their journal on connectivity in Northern and Indigenous communities. So we have copies out in the lobby available for everyone to pick up. But I will point out that the back cover artwork we commissioned for the journal is by, and I will butcher your name, Dale, Dale Kubliutuk. Dale Kubliutuk from Inuvialuit. So she's right in the back there. She also did the graphic for the t-shirt. So let's take a break and reconvene in 15 minutes.
If you can give us an idea, if you're interested in going up on Friday, the buses will leave at 6 o'clock from the Mackenzie Hotel, and there's a sign-up sheet right at the registration table. You can put your name down. And we have 2 satellite fields. We have the government one, which we'll do a tour there, and then we'll take you to the private satellite field there. And what we're hoping to do is perhaps, depending on how many people we have signed up, see whether we can pull together a barbecue or something like that to feed you up there. So if you can let us know today how many of you would be interested in, put your name in, let us know, okay? Thank you.
Talk, right? Okay. And if you forgot about it, if this guy wants to talk, it'll automatically turn up by talk, right?
Oh, wow.
Okay. So good deal. Yeah.
In conversations, can you migrate to the tables? Chris Rizzo. Sorry, I just recognized the face back there, so just wanted to hit home. So we're going to get started again. You know, we're on the ISOC schedule, which is getting more and more like Northern Time, or for this lower 48, you know, Indian Time. So I am substituting in for Mark. Mark is wrangling governments and doing all kinds of fun things, and I'm going to step into this panel having no relation to most of these people. So I'm going to let them, you know, carry the load. But what I'd like to say is, you know, this is a really key panel. It's infrastructure solutions for very rural and remote communities. And, you know, we are in one, and it's really near and dear to our hearts. So this should be a very informative panel for moving forward for all of us. So what I'd like to do is, like, I'm going to give you 3 minutes since there's so many of you. You know, do who you are, title, you know, the elevator speech, and then we'll move on and we'll go through everyone, and then we'll kind of open it up and see if we can get some interactivity going. So let's go ahead and start. Travis?
Sure. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Travis Schindel, and I'm with the Northern Lights General Partnership. I'm actually a former resident of Inuvik, so it's a tremendous pleasure to get home here and see familiar faces in the room and spend a bit of time over the next few days. So thank you for that. What the Northern Lights General Partnership is a partnership between LEDCOR and Northwest Tel. And that partnership has a mandate of managing, provisioning, and selling the Mackenzie Valley Fiber Link. So we've already heard a little bit about it this morning, particularly with Minister Schumann's address during his video. You saw some footage of the fiber link and what it is. So it is a 1,220 kilometer roughly fiber line running from here in Inuvik south down through the Mackenzie Valley. In this case, internet service provider, Tel and New North Networks, which redistributes Mackenzie Valley fiber bandwidth to We've been in operation for 1 year. We lit up the fiber in June of 2017. It was a very exciting time considering the geographic climate that consists up in the Northwest Territories. To be able to succeed with such an endeavor was an amazing accomplishment. So moving forward, what we're considering that we report into the Government of Northwest Territories, and what they're trying to encourage is more competitive priced internet at a high level. We are encouraging and working with other folks locally to become their own internet service providers, as well as the expansion and further at the ground station sites. So I've already had the opportunity this week to speak with the Internet Society on certain training and other opportunities that may be available there in terms of advancing ISP models in the Mackenzie Valley. So that's more to come on that. It was just very exciting to hear some potential there. So with that, I thank you and pass it along.
So my list is out of order. Well, either that or you guys shuffled it up just to keep me guessing. So, what's your name? Paul. Paul. So let's go with Paul, just since we're in this order. That way you can recognize them as they go. So Paul, come on.
Sure. Thanks. Hey, everybody. Paul Gillard. I'm Vice President of Business Markets and Government Relations for Northwest Health. Very happy to be here. I'm from Yellowknife. Don't hold that against me. Been living there 16 years now. The North is my home, as it is for all of our 550 employees that work north of 60. In the discussion today, again, with 3 minutes, I won't go on at length, but there's a lot of new technologies that are starting to find their ways into the North, and I think that there's a lot more tools in the toolbox than there used to be. We've heard about Mackenzie Valley Fiber Line, an asset paid for and owned by the government in the Northwest Territories. We're helping out as operations partner. The recent announcement with the Canada North Fiber Loop that's going to be coming from Dawson to Inuvik, creating that northern redundancy. Again, a project that's going to be owned by the Yukon government, and that Northwest Tel will be playing a part as an operations subcontractor. What I wanted to leave you guys with here is two things. Northwest Tel's vision is to help Northerners prosper and thrive in a highly connected North, and that doesn't just mean Whitehorse, Iqaluit, and Yellowknife. It means all of the communities of the North. We have employees that live and work here. We want them to have a quality of life, be able to start a business. We want to support that goal. We do have a history of doing so in maybe non-traditional models that you guys might not know about. So I mentioned where we're partnering with governments. We've also partnered with Indigenous businesses and Indigenous governments on several projects, and we absolutely are willing to do so again. I think this $750 million broadband pool is a unique opportunity. We're anxious to figure out a way to leverage that opportunity to execute on our vision, helping Northerners prosper and thrive. If you guys have a pitch, if you guys have an idea, if you're looking for a partner with experience on the ground with the technologies that we're talking about here, whether it be fiber, microwave, future LEO technologies, 5G wireless distribution, we're here and absolutely willing to have the discussion. So with that, I guess I'll hand it back to the facilitator and look forward to discussions we might have for the next couple of days.
Cool, thanks. Want to come on up? This is Sally, is it? Thanks.
Hi, my name is Sally Broad. I'm the general manager of Western James Bay Telecom Network. And I think you'll see from the two gentlemen that came before me that when you manage a company, an internet company, especially a fiber optic company, you can pretty much say what you want in under 3 minutes. Because we're doers, right? We get things done. We don't talk that much. I am very proud and pleased to be the general manager of the first 100% Indigenous-owned fiber optic network in Canada. We were the first. It's a 270-kilometer run from Moosonee, Ontario, up to Attawapiskat, Ontario. And the reason we have it is largely because De Beers found diamonds 90 kilometers west of Attawapiskat. They needed hydro to service that mine. And at the time, our Grand Chief, the late Stan Ludet, said, okay, if you're going to do that, you're going to go into our territory and you're going to do that, we want fiber optic. And we got it. So the last few years, we're celebrating our 10th anniversary this year. We've made mistakes. We've learned a lot. And as I was telling the people here in Inuvik, we understand what you're trying to do here. And I'll be pleased to come back, and I work for food. I'll help you all I can.
Will work for food is a good one. Have per diem, will travel is my motto. So, like, can I call on Bill, please, to come up?
Bill Murdoch, I'm the IT manager with Clear Sky Connections. Clear Sky Connections is was born out of originally the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, which under the health portfolio became First Nations Health and Social Secretary to Manitoba, and then the project became big enough and we separated in May to form our own corporation. The goal is to run fiber optics into all 63 First Nation communities in Manitoba. It's about 3,600 kilometers of new fiber. We actually haven't broken ground yet, but we're going to leverage existing fiber for a total of about 5,000 kilometers. The project has been ongoing off and on for about 10 years, with the new corporation being formed in May of this year, May of 2018. So the plan was to break ground in October of this year, which obviously that didn't happen. So based on the seasons, as well known in the north, the winter road, ice road construction season, we're hoping to break ground in actually spring with some quick wins, and more deployment in October to align with the winter road season.
So you guys are moving so fast. Like, you know, I said 3 minutes because I figured you'd run to 5. But that doesn't mean you can go to 5. Come on up. So you stay to 3 and we'll get more questions in this way.
Hi. Good morning. Bonjour. I'm Marc Dupuis. I'm the Senior Director for Spectrum for OneWeb, a startup company dealing or proposing a LEO constellation, a little bit like what Michelle was talking about this morning. I will probably take up that entire 3 minutes, Matthew. So, all right. So the first slide just shows one of our satellites. This is a completed satellite. It has a fairly small footprint. It's about, not footprint, but size. It's about a 1 meter cube satellite, much smaller than any of the geos you would have seen before. So before I launch into the presentation, I have a pop quiz to keep you awake this morning. So let's go to the next slide. And as oh, sorry, this is our usual disclaimer. I have to put this in the deck. Next slide. So you're going to see a few faces, and the pop quiz is what's common to these people, with the exception, of course, that they copied my dress code. So please, if you could just, Katie, go through the next couple of slides. Thank you. Really weird picture before that of Jeff Bezos, but okay, so and we'll stop at the next one, Katie. This is our founder, Greg Weiler. Those of you that were in New Mexico last year, I think, heard him speak. So the answer was obviously not the dress code issue, but they're, unlike me, they're all very, very successful entrepreneurs. And the reason they're successful entrepreneurs is what we heard this morning from Jane. It's all about people. They have contacts, they have connections, and it's not about being smarter than anybody else, it's really about the connections that they have. So Greg Weiler founded a company called O3B about 7 years ago, and O3B now is operational, was sold to SES, the largest satellite company in the world, and that Greg founded OneWeb. And as you can see from the chart, I'm sorry, shouldn't touch the microphone. I apologize for that. OneWeb is now very well funded. We have about $2 billion of capital raised, mostly out of SoftBank from Japan with Masayoshi-san that you saw earlier on the slide. And so, to our knowledge, we're probably the furthest ahead LEO constellation, being so well advanced and funded already. Not to the full constellation price, but we're at least halfway there. So, this slide looks a lot like Michelle's slide this morning, so I'm not going to go bore you with repeating what she said so eloquently this morning. But let me just say, why LEOs? Well, first of all, why satellites? You know, we heard a lot about fiber, and fiber is great. Actually, fiber is probably the #1 choice for everybody. It's almost unlimited bandwidth, low latency. The only problem with fiber is it can't reach every single population. And it was quite interesting to hear, I think it was you, Matthew, this morning said San Diego, 35 minutes outside, 35 miles, and still no connectivity. That's where satellite can play a huge role, can fill in all of those gaps. The other thing is, even if you had a redundant, which we don't have yet, link from here to the south, what happens if there's a cut? What happens if some animal just decides to chew through the cable? So, believe me or not, it does happen. And so satellite can actually be a very good back solution. Why LEO? As Michel said, the GSO community, geosynchronous orbit satellite community, are building high throughput satellites. You're going to have gigabits upon terabits everywhere in Canada, North America, the world, in fact. But the thing is, all of those are limited by GSO latency, which is about a half-second round trip. One packet to go and a packet to come back. And what Michel described as an annoyance this morning for video conference, and those of you that have seen GSO links, it's just a slight annoyance. Gamers will tell you it's a non-starter. You can't play shoot-'em-up games on a GSO link because you're dead before you even moved. No, again, that's just an annoyance to me. But imagine a few years in the future when you're not only doing remote consulting to your doctor is in San Diego operating on a patient in Inuvialuit or here in Inuvik. And he's doing it with remote robotics. Well, I wouldn't want to be the patient on the table when there's a half-second delay between what the doctor does and what the doctor sees is being done to you. And that sounds like sci-fi, but to me that's like, 3 to 5 years away. So latency is huge. Have you ever done cloud computing and you have a half-second latency? Forget it. The applications don't work, and there's many applications that won't work. So GEO will be great for pushing content, Netflix, and all that downstreaming. LEOs are absolutely essential to be fiber-like quality. Okay, I know I'm already going probably over time, so very quickly, speed, volume, very important, but do not forget latency in your specification. And I will skip, this is just an illustrative coverage map. LEOs will cover the north all the way to the North Pole, which GEOs cannot do. GEOs can only cover to about 80 degrees latitude. These are global solutions, and I'd just like to show a few pictures, and I will terminate very quickly. This is real hardware. This is our manufacturing plant in Florida, where we will be starting to build mass production of satellites, turning out 2 satellites a day once we're fully operational. Right now, they're being built in Toulouse, France. There's 10 satellites being built that will launch very early in 2019. Different form factors for user terminals, whether they're flat phased array or steering terminals. We're working with many vendors, like other competitors like Telesat and Starlink from SpaceX and others. We have real hardware on the ground. The site on the right is actually the sister site to Inuvik. It's Svalbard. So Svalbard already has about a dozen antennas built and more coming. Inuvik has 2 antennas being constructed right now, and hopefully some of you can join us on Friday when we tour the facility to look both at the government site, but also at the commercial site where we're working with KSAT to build our tracking and telemetry station here in Inuvik, and about another 10 antennas coming afterwards to control our satellite fleet. And this is a picture of the launch vehicle. So we're launching on Russian Soyuz, launching up to 32 satellites at a time, and therefore we can launch several hundred satellites in about a year and a half. So we plan to be operational in 2020, and as I said, I think we're ahead of most of the competitors, but there will be competition, and competition is good. Whether it's fiber, microwave, other terrestrial solution, or satellite, you need everybody. So thank you for listening to me and looking forward to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. So last and certainly not least, George.
Hi, I'm George, CEO for Quintillion. This is the company that Dwayne talked about earlier this morning, building a subsea cable system in Alaska. It's kind of a busy map there, but I'm going to spend a minute just kind of talking to that, and then I'll really address the topic, which is how have we done this in our markets. This is kind of the long-term plan. If you look at the red line there on the map, that is our phase 1 network. I joined the company in August of 2017. That network was not operational. Today it is. It went operational December of 2017. So we built about a 1,400-mile subsea fiber optic through the North American Arctic. For the first time, very challenging. We had to, get the network down anywhere from 1 to 4 meters below the historical ice scouring. So that took 2 actual seasons to get that done. The network then connects overland at a Licktock Point, and there's about a 510-mile network from a Licktock Point down to Fairbanks. At Fairbanks, we pick up the green. The green is a diverse route from Fairbanks to Anchorage, and then Anchorage to the lower 48. So we actually connect at the major internet gateways in the lower 48. So that system is all up and running. It's operated flawlessly. We've had 0 faults on the network in 2 years. It's quite a challenge getting it built, a little bit of a science experiment, but has changed the lives for the people that live in our market. So we serve Nome, Kotzebue, Point Hope, Wainwright, Barrow, and Prudhoe Bay in the oil and gas infield. Quintillion is a carrier's carrier. So we provide our bandwidth to the local exchange carriers who then sell their services to both residents and business. 10 months into this, all of the school districts that are servable by our network are on our network. You know, they're taking about 25 meg per school, which is all they're funded for through E-rate. It's made an enormous difference in all of their programs in the school and in the libraries. 3 or 4 of the major medical facilities are using our bandwidth through one of our providers. You know, I've toured these hospitals. They're brand new, beautiful, have telemedicine equipment and whatnot that they couldn't use because it didn't work over the satellite or the microwave systems. You know, we're serving many of the Alaska Native corporations, tons of small and medium businesses that are in our markets, and the large majority of residential clients. So the residential clients, you know, I did go to Tuck yesterday. You know, these markets here in Inuvik and Tuck remind me of some of ours. You know, I think before we offered service, the biggest bandwidth that you could get in a home or a business was like 1 meg. And that was metered heavily and very expensive. I don't know how costly it is here, but in our markets, you know, there is at least a 10 meg offering. We're working with some of our providers now to do a 20 to 25 down and 3 up. You know, the service has been incredible, changed people's lives. You know, gone to events with customers that have told me they used to take 5 hours to watch a episode of, you know, Game of Thrones, and now they can actually watch it in like normal time. We see the cost per meg come down by 60%. So far so good. Our client, we have gigabits of capacity on our network. You know, we're engineered for 30 terabits. We're upgradable to 90. So we have a pretty inexhaustible supply of capacity. We're looking at our growth rate next year. There's a lot of government opportunities on our network as well. So we are working on those for the mid and long term. Later today, I'm on a panel that talks about our international expansion. We do have a plan to build through the Canadian Arctic to Europe. Probably an intermediate step there is going to be to land a cable in Canada. We're looking for a diverse route for our network and also to be able to tie into some of the existing infrastructure here. So I'll talk about that later. Thank you very much. Very happy to be here.
So that's a big overview of a few options here. So for the remote communities, I have a million questions, but I want to make sure that the audience knows that they can ask questions as I'm asking questions. If I see hands, I'll integrate you into the flow. And we have a microphone here, and Richard and like 2 tables behind you or 3 tables behind you has a question. So we'll integrate that. But I have a couple real quick ones as we get started and as you move the microphone back. And a little bit of clarification for folks in the crowd. And I got to ask a question earlier, and I think I'll dispel some myth action at the moment. So everybody knows what a megabyte is? Don't be embarrassed. Yep. So 1,000 megabytes is a gigabyte. Know what that is? Heard of it? Right? Haven't experienced it yet, but you're waiting. Okay. So 1,000 of those is a terabyte, right? That's a mythical unicorn, not a narwhal whale, but a unicorn. And then you have petabyte, and it's increments of 1,000. So what these folks are talking about when they're talking about terabytes of data is it's, you know, thousands of gigabytes of data, which is, you know, multiplied 1,000, you get all kinds of crazy going on. So the other thing I want to say is like low Earth orbit, LEO, right? Low Earth orbit is what we're talking about with some of those satellite solutions. And because that low Earth orbit, that satellite to it
speeds, at least from a LEO perspective. That's not the intent for every user, but it's to actually get very high speed. So certainly, you know, exceeding, as Michel said earlier, the CRTC or the FCC broadband requirements, but also the low latency. Mm-hmm. Because the latency, as I said before, is absolutely key for many, many applications. Like, for example, anything that is interactive, very interactive, whether it's video conferencing, teleconferencing, or if you're doing things like, I mentioned gaming, or if you're doing remote computing and you're not having the software in your computer, software resides on the server. For every packet going between you and Microsoft Word, which resides on Microsoft servers, you're in trouble. You're going to hit a key, you're going to wait for half a second. So all of these applications require very, very low latency. Last but not least, though, is the capacity. As you mentioned, gigabytes, terabytes. For the first generation LEOs, we'll not be able to provide you, gigabytes per month for every user. We won't have that capacity, which the fiber, as my colleague from Cotillion said, probably can do that because they have so much capacity. But you know what? We're also scalable. So as the markets grow, we will grow with it. And as the technology and the demand grows, we will grow with it as well.
Okay, thanks. So one quick follow-up to that before we get to Richard, and that is low Earth orbit satellites tend to be affected by gravity and fall out of the sky. Will they hit me in the head, and how often do you have to replace them?
Maybe I'll take the first crack again. No, they won't hit you in the head. They fall in the sky typically on their own after 25 or 30 years or more. Actually, there's a lot of space junk up there that still hasn't fallen off the sky. In the case of OneWeb, and I can't speak for other operators, it was a 5-year design life, and we will re-enter, controlled re-enter, so that we can burn the satellite on re-entry. And they burn completely. There's nothing left, so nothing should fall on your head.
Cool.
And there's no nuclear power on the satellite, so don't worry about emissions.
Because remember, I'm taller than all of you, and I'll get hit first. So let's go to Richard in the crowd, and you have to have a microphone because you are being recorded. So keep it real.
As real as I can. So this is a question to Mark about follows up from what Matt was saying, which is that thinking about an area like this one, where you have a large area, you have scattered populations, how many satellites will be above, in the first generation, a particular point at any one time? What kind of aggregate capacity can they provide? Because I think, and how would they be affected by atmospheric conditions, rain fade, cloud, fog? And so in a sense, if we're designing a strategy that works for an area like this, I think LEOs have to be a part of the solution. But then how, what are their strengths and weaknesses, and how do we build these other solutions alongside them so we know what to campaign for, ask for, understand what the quantum will be to try to get very good, excellent, power on anywhere else in the world connectivity to indigenous places like this.
Sweet.
Yeah, it depends on the design. Like for us, we're taking probably a few terabits per second per satellite. For constellation of satellites, several terabits per second per satellite. We're talking gigabits per second. So we're not trying to displace or replace the Mackenzie fiber We're not trying to basically connect everybody in Inuvik, or even, for that matter, in Tuktoyaktuk. Now, we may be able to connect Tuktoyaktuk if it's not on the fiber by the time we launch as a sort of interim solution, but we fully expect, as we develop a market, to be replaced by fiber. And as Quintillion was saying, if they run a fiber through the Northwest Passage and connect a few of the larger towns, including Inuvialuit, in Nunavut, we will still be essential, in my opinion, to cover some of the smaller towns where it just doesn't make economic sense to pull a fiber, at least not in the medium term, when everybody consumes 100 gigabytes or 1,000 gigabytes per month, maybe. But for today, probably it wouldn't make economic sense. So we're kind of a front filler, and then the fiber comes in and displaces us. But there will always be communities. My cottage is less than an hour from Ottawa. I'm in a valley, and I have zero connectivity. Oh, no, sorry. I can get dial-up from Bell at 9.6 kilobits per second. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I forgot the second part. So, atmospheric is always an issue with satellites. We're operating our user links in KU band, which is not subject to a lot of rain fade, a few dBs. And we're operating so many satellites, especially over the north. You're actually getting the best coverage because we're polar, the same way as with one part of the Telesat constellation. The polar satellites are always above the north. And if you saw my chart, from any sort of location, you could probably see 3, 4, 5 satellites. So you're always picking up the best satellite, the best link. And with that best link, unlike the geo satellites today, where if you look at the Earth stations here, they're probably pointing maybe 5, 10, 20 degrees off the horizon. You'll be pointing somewhere between 90 and 70 degrees, always. So you're pointing straight up. You're not going through a lot of atmosphere. And this is a relatively, well, actually quite dry climate compared to, let's say, Indonesia or Brazil. And so if we can operate in Brazil quite successfully, we can certainly have very, very low link margins here and still offer 99.9%. Thanks.
Thank you. So I think this leads to a question that I have, and then if there's others, please raise your hand and get queued up on a mic. Quintillion's been mentioned a lot in all of the comments here, and I think I'm going to go down the row, but also let George, address this. I heard one connection to Northern Canada from your presentation, George, and I just heard multiple would be great from Mark, but what are the solutions to getting to these most remote communities, and how do we convince your development process and plan to land more than once in Northern Canada to give more diversity for opportunity for those really remote regions? I'll let you go first, and then I'll come down the panel skipping Mark because he's had his time, and then we'll go from there. Is that all right?
Okay. Yeah, good question. We do have a Canadian landing license today, and it contemplates about a dozen drops into different markets. Most of those are on the eastern side of Canada, and if we're able to connect here at Tuk and Inuvik, we're going to have that landing license modified. The reason that we're looking at this was my idea when I got to the company. We have a network that, while it's gold-plated engineered, and the plow that we had to use because the Arctic Ocean is very shallow, the plow that we used to dig that 4-meter trench was 55 tons. There's only one in the world, and Alcatel Submarine Networks owns it. And it's an extremely high-tech plow. So I wanted to have a diverse connection for our existing phase 1 network, if not 2, because I think one of the big economic development initiatives that we can bring to the state of Alaska and to our network and our investors is an Arctic data center in the Prudhoe Bay oil and gas infield area. So for that to be viable, we need to have at least one route to the lower 48, and a route through Northwest Canada would give us the option of terminating traffic to either the mountain region or Chicago, which would both be very interesting, because all of Alaska's traffic today goes down. On my map, you saw the 2 cables, but those cables are all within 50 meters of each other, so they don't really pass the rule for diversity or redundancy. And all the traffic terminates on the West Coast, so this would move it to the East Coast. So I saw that the McKenzie Valley project was finishing at the same time we were. And so I had our team look at, how could we build east and land and interconnect with that as a potential way to give us diversity, serve some additional markets. There's common government between U.S. and Canadian defense. So that's an initiative that I think gets us started going east. Our long-term plan is to either go through the upper or the lower Northwest Passage, possibly both. Those are very challenging to do because of the ice and the weather and just extreme conditions. But we've done that before. Some of it is deep water, which makes it much easier than shallow. We're interested in serving some government facilities in Greenland, so we're going to have to look at whether we do the upper, the lower, or both. And in the event that we do the lower channel, we have the Canadian landing license for that, which I think has a dozen or so different locations where we would be authorized to drop. The last thing I'll say is our company's privately funded. So, we're funded by an investor, private equity firm, so we don't have any government funding, we don't have any other partner funding, and one of the other things that I've been working on since I got to the company is to look at ways to get some government funding, also to get some other enterprise or strategic partner type funding, because, if we actually build that system from Europe to Asia through the Arctic, it'll be the only system, fiber system that is submarine connecting Europe to Asia that doesn't transit through a continent. It'll be the shortest and lowest latency route. I think that's interesting to a lot of major cloud and global communication carriers. So we're looking at that. As a part of all that developing, we'll be looking at where we can drop in Canada as well on that route.
Can you kill your mic? Thanks. Thank you. So I think we heard there that there may be opportunity to help them adjust their landing license for opportunity there. There may be local funding or regional funding that could pair up with what they're doing to entice them to get another landing spot closer to one of these rural communities that could benefit. So I think maybe the doors are still open a little bit to help influence the planning process of that to get a little bit more accessibility to the Quintillion project. Let's move this way with Bill. And so again, what's the way to get the middle mile to the remote communities so the remote communities can build out to actually get this service?
Well, the middle mile is actually the government term. We prefer the first mile.
Yeah.
So before you make decisions on, for the First Nation communities in Manitoba, before you make decisions on what's the best solution for the First Nation communities in Manitoba, you need to consult the First Nations to begin with. That there's a duty to consult. A lot of the First Nations already have some local solutions in place. They have some hybrid solutions. They have existing infrastructure that they're currently using. And to build into the community from the urban perspective to connect, it may push out the local the local infrastructure that's currently there. If you fund the major telco to go into a community, the local economic development opportunities may disappear because the telco will just take over, and that affects education and training, the economic development, sustainability. Sometimes you have the larger telcos, they'll come in and they'll say, well, we can build to the First Nation community. Then they start to build, we ran out of money, we need more money. So it's to avoid those complications. Communication is important, especially in the decision and the policy process, as well as the criteria to work with the funding providers. A lot of the problem with the First Nation communities is there is no business case. There is no ROI for private investment, or it is very limited. But if the funds are available to build the infrastructure, then the infrastructure can be sustained, and you could plan the model out over 20, 30 years of the life of the fiber to replenish the fiber based on that long-term model. And hopefully by the time I retire, we'll actually talk about redundant loops. But right now, it's just a single path to the community to connect the community.
Great. Thank you, Bill. So one of the things I heard there rings really true in the lower 48, well, Alaska, Hawaii as well. We're having a tough time reminding our federal government that they have an obligation to consult with the indigenous communities. And it is their, we're trustees, I guess. It's a trust relationship in the U.S., and they are responsible for having meaningful consultation. And we find our departments, Federal Communications Commissions, and a handful of others failing to do this on a regular basis. And I heard rumblings today of something in Canada that sounded similar. So that's something we're going to have to work on as indigenous communities, to keep poking back to the government and reminding them of their responsibility to actively engage us in this process. So Sally, would you like to comment on something on that realm? Either the connectivity question or...
Well, that's an issue that Western James Bay Telecom is facing right now, is we don't have redundancy and we have very little diversity. So, and that's really important that the communities have this. So the premise that we use is that we build from the community outwards. We find out what the community wants, what it needs, and then we build out from that. Which is why one of the things we're looking at is Nico's mesh idea. At least have a network in the community so people can talk to one another. That's really important, because the first thing that tends to happen when the fiber goes out is an immense feeling of isolation and, dare I say, in some cases, panic. So people are so reliant on the internet, and so I guess as internet providers, we feel an obligation to jump in and fill that need as quickly as we can. In our case on the coast, all the communities used to have cable network. The cable network is still active in one community, so we may be able to use that for diversity in the one community. The other thing we are looking at is the possibility of satellite service just as a backup. We used to have a microwave system, and that's a classic example of a top-down solution that was provided by a bigger entity, and they decided to pull out in 2014, took the towers down, basically left us holding the bag, responsible for the quality of service for the entire coast. It's not a place where I want to be having that much responsibility. It's always good to have a backup plan. And so those are options that we look at, and I cannot stress enough, you need a backup plan to a backup plan to a backup plan. When you're working in remote communities, you do everything possible to make sure that you're ready for any possible emergency situation.
Absolutely. Yeah, Southern California, we had fires come through, knock down our main communication tower. It took us 19 days to get it back together in 2007, and sure would have been nice to have a route around that. Luckily now we have redundancy and we don't have a single point of failure. Yeah, Sally, follow up.
Just quickly, one of the things that we are considering, and we're not sure we're going to go ahead because of the expense, but KNET, through an organization over in Quebec, is looking at providing breakout fiber service through a marine cable to Pewanik and Fort Severn. And we have been invited to look at that option, bringing the line down to Attawapskat. But we're still looking at whether or not that's going to be prohibitive for us.
Another thing that makes me think about this, the redundancy, is the low Earth orbit satellite folks. If they had a business model choice tier level where it was an oh no, our network's down, can we buy service from you for the next 2 months while we repair? That would be a really cool service. I don't know if it's a cost model that makes sense, but it may be something that you could be the technical band-aid to support these really rural communities when they have issues with the ground infrastructure. So Paul, go ahead and give your comments, and then we'll wrap it up with Travis.
Sure. As was stated earlier, there's real business case challenges with deployment of telecommunications infrastructure and services in the remote north. The good news is I think we're seeing a real appetite for investment in infrastructure north of 60. In telecommunications, we've seen some really encouraging announcements recently. GNWT, of course, funded the MVFL, $50 million for a new satellite network in Nunavut. Another $67 million for the redundant fiber in Yukon, right? It's good. There's an appetite there. What I would say we can do to be more successful at getting more of that pie is a couple of things. One is we should do what Northerners have always done, and we should work together. There's a lot of competing priorities in the north for infrastructure, roads, wastewater, telecommunications, power, and the list goes on and on and on. When you're in Ottawa and you're talking with a federal funder, the easiest pitch to make is one that touches on multiple areas of interest, right? So if you're going to build a road, let's put power beside that road. Let's put fiber on the poles with the power. And instead of giving me $50 million to build a road, give me $70 million and I'll build all three. I think that's a very compelling political proposition and something that we should all work together to pursue.
Absolutely.
I also think there is a need for certainty, for longevity, for supportability and scalability. I have a very selfish perspective. I work at Northwest Tel. I think we add value in that space. If you're considering a community network, I'm certainly supportive of that, but that doesn't mean that we don't have a shared area of interest in lobbying for infrastructure money to put the fiber optic cable in place to support that network, to put a wireless 5G network in place to distribute that to your users. We can work together and do that. I don't need to own all of the customers to participate and add value. And I think that there should be more discussions that we have on these creative models. And again, from my comments earlier, I look forward to having them. But maybe with that, I'll pass it to Travis.
Excellent. So Travis, the benefit of going last is you take notes the whole time, and you're going to back clean up, right?
Exactly. I'm just going to repeat everything that everyone just said.
Sure. With emphasis.
In terms of the redundancy factor, first of all, folks may or may not be aware, we do have a positive announcement around the Dempster fiber line, which will create the Canadian Northern Fiber Loop to south of us here. So in the case of a fiber cut as it relates to the Mackenzie Valley fiber link, we'll be able to redistribute the traffic around down the Dempster line, which is extremely good news, down south through the Yukon and over down through Fort Nelson, or across through McGill Lake, which is in Northwest Territories, over to high level. So there are actually tri-diversity options as it relates to the redundancy factor. In terms of connecting the communities, specifically the first mile or last mile, however you want to refer to it, that can be a tough question. However, as it relates to our project, the Mackenzie Valley Fiber Link, and the 6 communities that are on the route itself, you know, we've just been in operation for 1 year now. We've been up the valley on one particular occurrence, seeking input from the communities on what they would like to see. Obviously, as we've heard many times, we'd like to see fiber to the home, fiber to the home. Unfortunately, it was never scoped in on this particular project, as it comes with a great cost. However, that's not to say that, you know, folks couldn't possibly lobby for it in the future. We're just starting to work with folks. I mean, this particular summit is a perfect example of getting together with folks in this room, along with the event organizers themselves, and looking at ways in which we can look at ISP growth and redistributing bandwidth, which is, again, what the Mackenzie Valley Fiber Link is, backbone, bandwidth that gets redistributed in the 6 communities. And then, furthermore, if we look at where we are here in Inuvik, to the west of us we have a Klavik, looking at, obviously they are not on the fiber route per se at all. However, there is opportunity there for redistributing that signal via microwave or what have you. My point is we're just scratching the surface. The fiber was lit up in 2017. We're just getting in to really talk about the need of the matter. We've got several ISPs that are working with our bandwidth right now, and then of course the ground stations. So in terms of looking at other opportunities, looking at the Canadian government, the territorial government, for funding opportunities, obviously the return on investment needs to be there from a private point of view, but that's where I nudge my friend to my right here, Mr. Gillard, and look at where Northwest Tel can perhaps participate in opportunity should they welcome it. So there is there are possibilities. It's just a matter of getting creative with our Indigenous partners, in this case the Inuvialuit and the Gwich'in, and really looking at the types of models that are available.
Great, thank you. So I just want to remind everyone, engage our panelists as they walk off the panel. This is your time. You've been introduced to them. They all know you now. You're friends-ish. And, work them over. Get what you need out of them. In the interest of time, I know Steve has a question, but in the interest of time, I've got to end it. So ask your question of who you wanted to ask it to, unless it's me, offline. And thanks to our panelists. Great job.
Travis, Sally, Bill, Paul, Mark, and George. They're all people, so you can approach them. I'm sure they don't bite. Get their business cards. And thank you, Matt, for stepping in for Mark, who stepped in for Madeline. We're going to go back to the agenda really quick before we have lunch. Lunch is actually going to be served in the other room. We're going to be all dining together. And we'll start lunch in about 10-15 minutes. We're just going to have one more flash presentation. So you'll want to stick around for this one and ask some questions. We have Laura Way from Cannor and Jim Schlichting from the FCC, Federal Communications Commission.
They provide on the governance side, the technical side, on the spirit side of things, health side of things.
Thank you. It's an honor for us to be here today, and we're not going to so much talk about what the government of Canada is doing or the government of the United States is doing. We're here to talk about what we're doing together through the work of the Arctic Council. The Arctic Council, as many of you are probably familiar with, is the premier circumpolar forum for cooperation amongst the Arctic states. And so it's the 8 Arctic nations: Canada, Kingdom of Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, Russia, Sweden, and the United States. And the Arctic Council also has permanent Indigenous representatives, and the ones most directly here are ones like the Arctic Athabascan Council, the Gretchen Council International, and the Inuit Circumpolar Council. And 30 non-organizations participate as observers. There are non-Arctic states, other international organizations, and non-governmental organizations. Currently, the Arctic Council has connectivity as a priority under the Finnish chairmanship. And as a group, we're working to develop a report which will be released next spring to ministers, which include an overview of the current and emerging technologies, as well as recommendations for member states to improve connectivity throughout the Arctic. This builds on previous work of the former task force, which was under the US chairmanship, the Task Force on Telecommunications Infrastructure in the Arctic. And that report's on the Council's website. And if you haven't read it, it's a really good read. It provides a comprehensive overview of the telecommunications in the Arctic. So I was going to talk about the Dempster fiber link and the Mackenzie Valley fiber link, because the Canadian government has put some funds into those projects through the Connect to Innovate. But as we heard about those through people more directly responsible, I thought I would focus on more of the things that we've heard from other Arctic nations and what they're doing to solve the connectivity problems in their neighborhoods. So one of the things that we have heard about at our meetings is that Norway and Russia, there's ongoing projects to deploy high elliptical HEO satellites with steerable beams, which will cover most, if not all, the Arctic. The promise of at least some of these new satellite systems, including HEOs, and as we heard in the previous presentation, LEO satellites, will help provide additional capacity to meet the needs in the Arctic. One of the things that the task force is particularly looking at is things that could be pan-Arctic solutions or things for maritime solutions. And one particular thing that we've heard about is the Global Maritime Distress and Safety System that will be soon available in the Arctic region for the first time. This new system will allow people in distress in the Arctic to not only communicate their position, but also to inform about the type of distress through text or voice technology. And Iridium expects to offer this service in the Arctic in the early 2020. Telecom operators in Iceland, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands have also helped bridge the gap between crews on fishing vessels and their families and friends on shore. They're now deploying a GSM-based station which is installed on the fishing vessel. This station allows the crews to make phone calls and texts on the Arctic Ocean at no extra cost above their regular cellular plans. And we've heard that this one is all about affordability. It's just not about access, and so this addresses that affordability question. Good communication, of course, is essential for attracting young people to these jobs in fishing vessels, and therefore this new technology contributing to the viability of these local communities and economies in these very remote areas. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Jim from the FCC, and he's going to provide some Alaskan examples about how things are deploying multiple technologies over the same land space to build redundant and reliable systems.
All right, don't touch. No touching the microphone. Yeah, I'm Jim Schlichting. I'm with the Federal Communications Commission. As Laura said, I'm not here right now to talk about what the FCC is doing, but in a blatant push for my panel tomorrow, I'll be talking about some of the things we're doing in the U.S. Tomorrow at one of the breakout sessions. But what I'm doing today is to cover what's happening in Alaska, what we've learned is happening into Alaska, and as Laura mentioned, diverse technologies. George, just earlier today, talked about fiber, so I'm just going to ignore fiber for this purpose. What I'm going to be focusing on is some of the stuff that GCI has done through the Terra network in the sort of the middle and lower part of the state and some of the more very remote communities and the like. And what GCI has done is to come up with a ring that includes microwave and includes fiber, depending on the underlying economics, and has used the ability to use like three forms of federal grants, three forms of federal grants, some funding from multiple FCC programs, as well as some grants from the state of Alaska, as well as a fair amount of their own capital to build these links and the like. So it's an example of a company that has looked to a wide variety of potential funding sources in order to basically put together a very important backhaul, middle mile, whatever you want to call it, system in some of the more rural parts of Alaska and the like. So that was what I wanted to highlight in this last presentation. As Laura indicated, I really do recommend that people take a look at the prior report from 2017. It is, it's a circumpolar assessment of what at that time was available in broadband throughout the Arctic, and talked about some potential solutions. The new report we're working on is on an update for various technologies. I've gotten a lot so far with regard to different solutions that will be available in Indigenous communities, including in the Arctic, and some of the same conclusions or similar conclusions were coming up at the staff level in the task force, and that is there ain't going to be one solution, there ain't going to be one technology, that one is going to have to try to leverage all the technologies with different time frames, with different trade-offs to try to come up with the best solution in the longer term. So with that, Laura and I certainly are going to be available through the rest of the conference. And if there are any particular questions one wants to address right now, we're open to it, but we do realize that lunch is next, so we won't be offended if nobody has any questions. Lunch wins, I guess. Oh, there is a question.
Yeah, this is. Oops, I have to press it. Is it on? It's on.
There we go.
Sorry, don't touch the mic. I just wanted to say a couple of things. One is I'm happy to add to what you just heard about Alaska, having worked a lot there and worked with many of both the Indigenous groups as well as working on policy with the major companies. I think there's some very interesting models, as you said. Also, I think it's worth, and we'll bring out tomorrow, that there are not only different funding programs and strategies, but different user support programs across the Arctic and including in Canada and the US that really do influence some of the strategies and business models. So I hope we can explore that more tomorrow, but thanks. I'm Heather Hudson.
Yes, I was about to say, I will introduce you if you don't want to introduce yourself.
Okay, thank you.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Wow, that's a lot of notes here for a very short speech. Listen, we're going to take a break for lunch. There's sandwiches, there's soup in the other hall over there, and we're going to have a short discussion with a couple people on the agenda, so you're welcome to make your way over there, and we'll reconvene here in about an hour. Thank you.